And with that, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you all today. Um, and perhaps some of you have sat in on some of the previous sessions that I've done, and we've sort of kept it moving. So if you've been in any of the previous sessions, we've talked a lot about trauma and how that impacts the brain and learning and kids' behavior. And we're kind of at this point where we're talking about de-escalation and mindfulness strategies now. And if you were not in those sessions, don't worry. It's not like you won't understand what we're doing today. This is definitely a standalone topic, but I just wanted to give a little shout out in case some of you had been in any of those previous sessions. So I'll start off. Quick introduction. My name is Elisa Kazarowski. I have been in education for about 20 years. I've done all the different jobs. I've been a teacher and a reading specialist and an instructional coach, a school administrator. And since right before COVID, when I left my admin position, I travel around and I train on all sorts of just different trauma informed social emotional learning topics. So I'm really glad to be with you here today. We're going to cover a lot in a short amount of time. There are learning objectives here. I'm not going to read them to you, but they are there just in case you're wondering sort of where we're heading in the next hour. So I want to get started just with you all thinking kind of on your own. If you want to pop it in the chat, you're more than welcome to. Think about what your go-to strategy is for calming down. So when you are feeling anxious or overwhelmed or stressed out because it's December 6th and you're trying to finish up the semester and we have all of the holiday things going on, or when you're angry at somebody, what is the strategy or the thing that you tend to do to de-escalate or sort of calm yourself down? So either think about it, pop it in the chat, and we're actually not going to spend any more time on that right at this moment because we're going to circle back to it, and you'll kind of see why I've asked you to think about that. I'm just quickly looking in the chat, though. I see a lot of people have talked about breathing or meditation and using essential oils. Absolutely. And those are all things that typically come up. And if yours that you're thinking of is you're like, oh, mine is nothing like that, that's okay. We have all these different strategies, right, that we can use. So think about that, pop it in the chat if you want to, and we're going to come back to that in just a little bit. Okay, so let's just start with a quick recap of what is going on in our brain when we're stressed out, right? Or when our kids are stressed out. And by stress, so I almost don't love the term trauma informed anymore, and maybe some of you will understand or relate to where I'm coming from. And I know it's, in my title and it's on so many slides that I share every time I'm presenting. But I think when we think about being trauma informed, there's still a subset of people that think that our kids need to have experienced this certain thing for these strategies to work, right? They need to fit into this box of they've been abused or they've been neglected or they've experienced this big traumatic thing. And sure, that's kind of how we started thinking about this. But what we know now is that trauma-informed strategies, social emotional learning, de-escalation and mindfulness strategies, everything we're going to talk about today, are really just best practice for all of our kids. They're best practice for ourselves when we are experiencing the normal stressors in life. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're going. So when I say the brain on stress, that's a pretty wide spectrum, right? So when we are in social engagement, and that's just a fancy term for we're balanced. We're in that balanced state where we feel calm and our brain is not under that duress. Then when we have all of these sensory inputs coming at us from every direction, like many of us do, we are able to access the prefrontal cortex, we are able to distinguish between when something is truly a threat or a danger and when it's not. And our brain is able to say, oh, okay, this person needs to talk to me about this thing. And that's not necessarily this negative confrontational thing. Maybe we just need to have a conversation about something or whatever it is. So when we're thinking about our kids, so say we have a student that we are trying to have a conversation with about, their attendance or about their 47 missing assignments that they have, right? If they are able to access their prefrontal cortex, then they recognize that that's just a conversation that needs to happen, and they can be calm and they can be reflective, they can be thoughtful in how they respond to the other person in the conversation. That's sort of the ideal. That's where we want to be, right? We're not all always there though. But when we are in that balanced state, we are able to process through information, analyze it, and have a balanced response. So what we know about the prefrontal cortex, because remember I said in order to have that balanced response or thoughtful response, we need to be able to access the prefrontal cortex. That's really important because we know that the prefrontal cortex is responsible for so many things. Here's just a little snapshot of some of those things: processing, memorizing, analyzing information, planning, goal setting, executive functioning skills, our communication skills, decision making. These are all really big skills. And if you're looking at them thinking, man, we have a lot of kids who really, they aren't great at a lot of those things. That would be correct, right? We have a lot of kids who struggle with effective communication or social skills, that struggle to make thoughtful decisions, right? That are not just reactive. That's why being able to access the prefrontal cortex is so important. Mindful thinking, thoughtful decision making, all of those skills can only happen when that prefrontal cortex is allowed to do its job. When we are not in that balanced state, and our amygdala goes off and says, hey, we're in potential danger, there's a potential threat or stressful situation. If we can't access that, then we're down in that bottom area. So what happens? We get pushed into that flight, fight, freeze response or the stress response. Those are our kids, going back to my example a minute ago, if we're confronting a kid about missing assignments or attendance, and they instantly become defensive and they start yelling at you, or they walk away and they're just like, I'm not having this conversation. That's what's happening. Their amygdala has said, this is a dangerous situation and you need to get yourself out of here. And if you can't, then you need to fight, typically through words in that specific scenario. Okay, so, there we go. We have a lot of kids whose amygdala are triggering those false alarms, right? So they're not able to access that prefrontal cortex. They go into flight fight mode and they can't think rationally. These are the kids, I always kind of use this example, where the thing that happens is sort of here. And if I had a bigger screen, I would be way down here by my hips, right? So somebody looks at them the wrong way, or somebody calls them a name. It's not nice, it's not great, but it's not a big deal. And their reaction is way up here. These are the kids where we're going, whoa, what just happened? Why did they react like that? Their reaction didn't match the situation, because they are disconnected from that rational thinking. They're just in a state of impulsivity, reactivity. Even though this is not a life-threatening situation, somebody is not trying to hurt them or out to get them, but that amygdala is just triggering those false alarms, and their brain is not making sense of what's going on. They're not able to have that thoughtful kind of thinking happening before they respond. We also know that the flight, fight, freeze responses are meant to be a short-term response to a threat, where we kind of go into that stress response until the situation is over, and eventually we sort of come back to a balanced state. we have a lot of kids, and I've described them in a lot of different ways already, that they are stuck in that flight and fight mode, right? They're stuck in that stress response. They're in a chronic state of activation. And when that happens, obviously their body is going to become dysregulated. And when that is the case, we have sort of two paths that we can take. It's sort of like we've come to a fork in the road, and which path are we going to take? The first option is not the great option, right? So it's fold mode. So yes, there is a fourth F if you didn't know. It's so we have flight, fight, freeze, and fold. And people use different terms for this, but I like to keep it in the F family. So fold mode is when we just sort of collapse. We go into that sort of feeling of we're just defeated, right? These, again, are the people that are living in that chronic state of activation, whether it's because they're going home to trauma day in and day out. Did I just lose my screen for you guys? Or can you still see it?
We can
Okay.
still see it.
Oh, okay. It just disappeared. Okay. It disappeared on my screen, and now it's back. All right. I'm glad that you can still see it. Perfect.
Yes, you're all good.
Okay. So people that are living in that chronic state of activation, they're just sort of waiting for that trigger to just immediately send them back to that event, right? Whether that is they're going home to the trauma of abuse or neglect every day, or just in that sort of state of chronic stress, right? Which a lot of us can probably relate to if you think back to some of the days during the pandemic, where it was just that chronic stress, day in and day out. And when we're in that state, any little trigger, any sort of sensory trigger can sort of just push us right off the cliff, right? And send us back into that flight, fight response. We can live in this state for a very long time. As you know, there are lots of people out there with PTSD, whether diagnosed or not, that are living in this state for days, weeks, months, years at a time. And they'll continue in that until their trauma has been processed or resolved in some way. Okay, so I'm guessing that this doesn't sound like a great place to live your daily life, right? Nobody wants to be here every single day, day in and day out. So what is our other option? Because remember, I said it's a fork in the road. We have another option that is more positive. And that other option is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is one of 12 cranial nerves in our body. It runs from our brainstem all the way down our body to our intestinal system. It has both sensory and motor functions, which kind of makes it a little bit unique as far as the cranial nerves go. Also, that's what makes it so important in the idea of the mind-body connection. So we have sensory and motor functions, and it plays a key role in that mind-body connection. The other really important job that the vagus nerve has is turning off the stress response. Now, sort of the caveat here is that the only way that it can do that, though, is by us activating the vagus nerve. So in other words, we have to sort of turn the vagus nerve off or on, not off, on, so that it can turn the stress response or the amygdala off. So this, sounds complicated when we first hear this vagus nerve. How do we activate the vagus nerve? And it's really not that complicated, though. So how do we activate it? Deep breathing, singing, humming, meditation, yoga, exercise, human contact, like physical touch, hugging, laughing. The list goes on and on. So on the right-hand side of my slide, you see, do you recognize any of these strategies? So I'm going to go back into the chat. And look, I know just a few of you put it in the chat. That's fine. You did not have to. But go back and think about the question that I asked you at the very beginning. What strategies are you using when you are feeling escalated or activated? People said deep breathing, sighs, meditation, essential oils, reading. The reason that I asked you that question is because I wanted to show you that all of us as adults, most of us, I won't say all of us, most of us have strategies that we use regularly that are activating the vagus nerve. And maybe we knew about the vagus nerve before and we knew that that's sort of the science behind what's going on. And maybe some of you are like, I had no idea why that worked. The difference is our kids don't have a lot of that background, right? Unless they've been very, lucky enough to have parents or family members at home or a teacher who has really explicitly taught them some of these things. If I ask you right now, and you can think about this, or again, you can add it in the chat if you want, or feel free to just pop off of mute and tell me, how did you figure out that that strategy worked for you, whatever that strategy was? How did you figure out that that worked for you? I was waiting for somebody to say it or put it in the chat because I knew what was coming. Yes, thank you, Carrie. I'm guessing that a lot of you are in the same boat, trial and error. Trial and error is how you figured out what works for you. And maybe you figured it out early on, but more than likely, you are like a lot of us who didn't figure it out until much later in life, right? Or didn't have the awareness around it to even understand what was going on. So we can do better, though, as far as our kids go, because we know that we have a lot of kids struggling, a lot, and even more since COVID. We need to be explicit about filling their toolboxes with strategies to activate the vagus nerve, whether we use that vocabulary or not, so that they have something to pull from. Because we also know that there are a lot of adults out there who don't have these strategies, right? Whether through trial and error haven't figured out what works for them, or are just not aware enough or self-aware enough to even realize that they're escalated and need to kind of come down. A great example of this is I was walking the dog the other day, and a neighbor, it's actually just a couple of houses down from me, ran out of her house. And this is sort of that neighbor, right? Kind of known for these outbursts. I don't know that I've had a pleasant conversation in 7 years with this particular neighbor. And she ran out of her house and started yelling at me about my dog going to the bathroom in her yard, right? You can imagine where this is going, which actually didn't even happen. It was like not even a real thing. Like the dog was, yes, in the yard. Nothing happened. And she was screaming at me on her lawn in front of anybody who walked by, drove by, right? And I was like, whoa, I did nothing. I have no idea. Of course, I don't know the circumstances of what was going on, right at that moment with her. But we have a lot of adults who struggle to have that balanced response, right? Who cannot go out and speak to a neighbor or a coworker, whoever that is, without being very confrontational because they just don't have that skill set. We have to do better with our kids. So we have a few ways here that we can activate the vagus nerve, but we have so many more that we're going to talk about. And again, these are just our de-escalation, our mindfulness strategies. To kind of wrap up that piece of the conversation, though, once we've activated the vagus nerve, we have to keep practicing those skills so that not only can we get back into a balanced state, but also we know that by practicing these things proactively, we can help keep ourselves in a balanced state. And that doesn't mean that we're never going to be, stressed out or angry or anxious about something, but we are much better equipped to handle it when we're starting sort of at that balance level versus starting already a little bit up a ways. Okay, so this is a really important thing to think about and remember. When we talk about de-escalation and mindfulness strategies, yes, those words do mean sort of opposite things, but the actual strategies that we're going to talk about, or that we already have talked about, some of them, they're all the same. We use them at different times and for different purposes. So when we are escalated and we need to come down, then we're talking about de-escalation strategies, or that's what we call them. But when we are trying to be proactive, like what I was just talking about, in keeping ourselves in that balanced state, then we refer to them as mindfulness strategies. But really, all of the strategies are exactly the same. So why do I point this out? Because I think that it makes it actually a little bit easier for us to teach these to kids then, because we can teach them to kids sort of in that proactive manner. We know that the last kind of moment that we should be teaching kids a de-escalation strategy is actually when they're escalated, right? Because they are disconnected from rational thinking. They are not able to take in what we're saying and make sense of it and say, oh, yes, okay, let me try this strategy that's going to help me calm down. And also, let me put it in my toolbox for future use. That's not happening when they're escalated. So we have to use those proactive times, those proactive opportunities to teach them strategies. And then we can say, hey, what's really great about this is, yeah, I'm teaching you, to do this deep breathing exercise or this yoga pose or whatever it is. And we're doing this together when we're all kind of calm, which is a great way to learn it. But then we can add it to our toolbox so that when we are escalated, you have strategies to pull from. And that does not mean that they're going to remember to use those strategies, right? Because they're kids and they require, an incessant and ridiculous number of reminders, and that's fine. But if we keep giving those reminders verbally, putting visual reminders up on our walls, eventually they're going to get it, right? And it's not a short process, I recognize that, but eventually they're going to start recognizing those strategies as being helpful. So I've said this, in a couple of different ways, but to be even more precise, the other piece of this is that we have to teach kids to recognize and name their emotions in order to self-regulate. If you know anything about Mark Brackett's ruler model, or there's lots of different models out there, that happens to be one that I really like, we know that that self-regulation is like the last stop, right? It's the last stop on the train. There are a lot of steps before kids or adults, humans, are able to self-regulate. And one of those steps is recognizing that they're even having a feeling and then being able to name it. We have a lot of kids who do not have this ability. They don't have the vocabulary, usually, is what it comes down to. They don't have the words to name what they're feeling. And we don't, in a lot of homes and a lot of classrooms, and I mean, the tide is changing, but we don't talk about it a whole lot. My house is very different. My husband often says, like, do we always have to be talking about feelings? Yes, we do. That's my response. Yes, we're always talking about feelings. How did that make you feel? What do you feel right now? What are the consequences of you doing that on other people's feelings and emotions? So that's sort of the first stop, is giving our kids this vocabulary. Until they've mastered that art of self-regulation, and going back to what I said a few minutes ago, we have a lot of adults in the world who have not mastered the art of self-regulation, right? And so we know that this is a problem. We have to teach and practice and teach and practice and remind and teach and practice all of these strategies. We have to help them to understand, recognizing their feelings, naming their feelings, but then they have to know what to do about it. And we just continually practice that over and over and over again, in the hopes that we get to the point where one day our kids are like, oh, you know what? I can use this strategy right now to help me. Sort of where hopefully most of us are. Although we can probably all think of times when we didn't use a strategy and we needed to, right? And we we lost our temper, we handled a situation poorly. That's going to happen because we're human. But for the most part, if we reach that level of self-regulation, then we are able to make the choice to do something that is going to sort of bring us down. Okay, so how do we explicitly teach strategies to kids? A couple of things that I have to say about this. The first, and this is always my sort of suggestion for anybody, anywhere, is just pick one strategy to introduce each week, each month, each whatever your time period is that feels doable to you. Let's teach kids one of these strategies during each of those time periods. And then let's use the gradual release model. So I'm modeling it, and then we're doing it together. And then hopefully, well, I mean, we're giving them opportunity for them to do it also, but hopefully we get to that point where they can do it without us prompting them. We also need to help kids understand that not all strategies are going to feel right to them. If you can, I just take a minute to think, what is a strategy that you can think of that is not ever going to be your go-to strategy for calming down? You can think about it, you can pop it in the chat if you want to. What are you like, I'm never going to do that to help calm myself down? Like for me, I am not musical. I don't, my place in life with, a lot of kids and, just a busy life, I don't even turn music on in the car. It's not calming to me. I like quiet. So music, singing, those things are not going to be a strategy that I would pick. Okay, so somebody said tensing and releasing muscles. Okay. And so to me, I'm like, oh, well, that's something that I would do. Square breathing makes you lightheaded for sure. Some breathing, deep breathing strategies. So it's normal. Use these as examples with kids. I used to always use yoga as my example because I feel like I need to like go out and run 3 miles in order to feel like I've like, gotten all the anger and stress or whatever out. And so I would always say like, I'm not going to stretch or use yoga. Well, now I'm at a place in life where I kind of have to do yoga in order to be able to walk around and have function in my body most days. So I don't get to use that one as my example anymore. But give kids their your examples, and make it, make yourself human to them. That's also another great strategy that we need to use with kids, right? Let them know that it is okay if you are teaching a strategy and it just doesn't feel right to them. We want to encourage them to try things, right? Like we're not just going to be like, nope, I'm going to sit this one out. Like, let's at least try it. But it's okay if that one doesn't go in your toolbox. The ones that do work for you, those are the ones we're adding to the toolbox. If we're doing something that requires focus or meditation, something like that, help us understand, what do we do when our mind starts to wander? That is a struggle for me still. If I'm trying to find, 5 minutes of quiet and focus in on things, I struggle with this in my daily work. My brain moves, as probably many of yours does, in 100 different directions all at the same time. And I find myself getting up from my desk and walking away to do something else. And then I don't finish that something else. And I've moved on to, a new thing. How do we start to really focus? And then we have to give them those opportunities and the encouragement to just practice, both proactively and reactively. And we're going to talk about that reactive piece in a minute, what that looks like in terms of co-regulation. And then another just great tip is give kids visual reminders of the strategies that have been taught. Put them up in your office, in your classroom, around your house, wherever you're using these. If you're doing mountain breathing or 5-finger breathing, trace your hand, put it up on the wall. Like, oh, that's a great reminder when they see, oh yeah, I remember when I was taught that specific breathing exercise. So put visual reminders up for them. All right. This is just a quick little statistic that I always like to share, just on the power of mindfulness. So this comes from Stanford University and nope, Harvard University, my bad. Uh, and what they found, it's not like a huge thing, right? But even 5 minutes of a daily mindfulness practice can start to strengthen those neural pathways. So we're retraining the brain. We're working those muscles and decreasing those false alarms that we talked about, decreasing those just impulsive reactive responses that so many kids have, and starts to encourage our brain to think more reflectively, be more thoughtful in their response. So I know as educators, we don't, most of us in our schools don't have a separate SEL class. And if you do, great, you're super lucky, right? We don't have 30 minutes that we can, just do social emotional learning and mindfulness and meditation and all these great things, which sounds fantastic. And I wish it were a reality. It's just not. So I add this in here to show that even 5 minutes is beneficial. And if you feel like, oof, 5 minutes, I don't even know that I have that. Great. 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And at the beginning of the day, as they're coming back from lunch or recess or going to lunch or recess, restroom breaks, right? When we never know what to do with kids because they're just like all sitting around and it just becomes mayhem. We can find these little pockets of time, even if it's just a minute or two at a time. That is going to be beneficial. All right, other mindfulness strategies. A lot of these we've talked about, right? And some of these are repeats from the last slide. A couple of new ones that are on here: drawing, journaling, dancing, mindful listening or noticing activities where we're paying attention to just one sense. So we're just focusing in on things that we hear for maybe 60 seconds. So we're focusing in on things that we see that are the color red or that are circles around the room. You can do that with shapes, colors, numbers, letters. Schools are great for that because we have so many things up on the walls. Grounding, visualization. These are all great mindfulness strategies that we can teach to kids. Others, and as you know, the list goes on and on, right? We have tearing paper or putty is another one. I like to call that productive destruction because we have some kids that destroy things. They like to destroy things and we don't want them to destroy our things. So give them some paper, give them putty. It makes that satisfying snap as it's pulled apart, right? Movement activities, sensory tools, things like puzzles, Mad Libs, things that are sort of distracting as a coping skill, right? The clench and release that somebody just mentioned, covering up with a blanket, having a snack. Some of you may have been thinking that when I initially asked the question at the very beginning, what's your go-to strategy? I can tell you right now, every single school or room I've been in, somebody says, eat something or have some chocolate or, drink a glass of wine or whatever it is. For sure. Like sometimes that is sort of our coping skill that we go to, right? Now there's a fine line between like healthy coping skills or de-escalation strategies and unhealthy, right? But sometimes we just need to have a snack. That's fine. Twisting pipe cleaners, wall push-ups, stretching, all of these things are strategies that can be used and pretty easily taught or made available to kids. All right, so we sort of need to address this co-regulation that I mentioned a minute ago, because sure, we're going to teach kids these strategies, proactively as a mindfulness practice, maybe first thing in the morning or whatever. But what do we do then, more importantly, when we have these escalated kids and we need to help de-escalate them? So the term for that is co-regulation. So when we are working with kids and trying to help sort of calm them down, soothe them, help them work through those emotions or sensations or whatever it is they're feeling. The thing about this idea of co-regulation is that we cannot de-escalate kids when we are ourselves escalated. And I'm not saying that that's it, don't ever become escalated. We can't control that. Often we become escalated as we're trying to calm kids down because we get frustrated that nothing's working. And so we sort of like start to feel ourselves creeping up, and that's fine. That's normal. We're humans. But what we need to recognize is when that happens so that we can then find somebody who is not escalated to help that kid, because we are of no use to them. So when we are co-regulating, assuming that we are still sort of in that balanced state, things that we need to remember, and some of this is just common sense, right? Like we need to have a calming presence. We need to have a calm tone of voice. We can acknowledge our kids or our students' distress or stress levels. We can obviously, we're modeling behaviors, we're modeling strategies for kids. We're providing them an environment, or we're creating an environment that is making them feel safe and that sense of belonging. We're taking our cues from our kids or from the student that we're working with, right? And we're trying to maintain that state for ourselves in some way. We have to recognize, though, when our emotional state becomes elevated to the point that we can no longer help that kid. And it's helpful if we have a system in place for that. So that might look like some sort of tag in, tag out system, which is what we used in my school, where it was okay for us to say, hey, I am of no help to this kid right now, and I need you to come sort of assist me because I'm here and that's not helpful to them. It may be recognizing that there are certain kids, and I can definitely relate to this, that for whatever reason we just don't connect with. And so we don't go for that kid. When I would get a call as an administrator for a certain student, and I'm like, oh, the sight of my face just makes that kid like even more anxious or escalated for some reason, then I'm not going to go for that student. I'm going to call on somebody else who has a great relationship with that kid to go. And I'm going to be okay with that and not feel like I'm a failure as an educator. Okay. So having those systems in place is really important. Other de-escalation co-regulation strategies for adults to remember. And again, some of these are just sort of common sense, right? Where we need to make sure that we are aware of our voice level, our tone of voice, our body language. Maybe we get down on their level for our younger, smaller kids. Maybe we're using some sort of rhythmic tapping where, we're just sitting with them and we're sort of doing this, right? Just to sort of calm. Because also we know that just telling a kid to calm down is not going to calm them down, right? It's just like saying, stop crying. They're probably not going to just stop crying because we said that. Listening to them, listening without interrupting them. That can be hard for us because we want to just sort of give them all sorts of advice and do this and try that. And sometimes they just need us to listen, validating their feelings, not their actions. Hey, it's okay that you are sad or upset. It's not okay that you reacted by punching a hole in the wall or kicking that person. Giving silence, personal space for those kids that just kind of need that. Let them sort of take a minute, right? We've all been in that situation where we need to go hide in the bathroom or in the pantry at home or wherever to just get away and have a moment. Asking what they need. This is something that we don't do a whole lot of. What is it in this moment that you need in order to get through this? How can I help you in some way? avoiding triggers, increasing predictability. That's really what this is all about. How do we avoid, once we know what a kid's trigger is, how can we avoid those? How can we increase predictability for students so that they know what to expect and they're not surprised and we're not setting them off? Being non-judgmental, decreasing stimuli. That's my nice way of saying if they're going to start throwing chairs or, desks, like get them to a safe place. And then tagging out is what I just talked about just a second ago. How can we kind of tag in, tag out? All right. So I would love to just go through these kind of next steps. So I think one thing that is really hard about sitting and listening to any sort of professional development or anything that we do like this is where do we go from here? What do we do next? So let's talk through a couple of things that we could do. We can share what we've learned, first of all, right? We can share it with people in our building who are struggling, that we recognize as struggling. We can share some of these strategies with our parents, right? Our kids' parents, because all of these strategies work just as well at home with kids as they do at school with students, right? I use all of these with my kids at home, just like I do at school. Thinking about how we can implement or incorporate a strategy a week or a month into our classroom or our whatever your work environment is. Explicitly teaching, and I said this earlier, whether you use the language or not, explicitly teaching kids how to activate their vagus nerve. So giving them those tools for their toolbox, basically. And if you are not a classroom teacher, then how can you team up with a classroom teacher, or how can you push in at some point, or how can you make that work for your work environment, your role in the school, so that you have some kids that you can maybe try some of these out with. A newsletter, an email blast, something like that, that you can share some of this with the teachers in your building, the staff in your building, and like I said earlier, the parents. So it's always going to be helpful when we start to align what we are doing at school and giving parents some of those tips so that they can maybe be using some of those same strategies at home. Teaching our kids about their brain and how it works. Let's empower them to start to understand what's going on in their brain when they're feeling escalated. How does it work when their amygdala goes off? And there are so many resources out there for really helping our kids understand this in a way that makes sense to them. Beginning or continuing a daily mindfulness practice, like I said, again, I've said it so many times, right? Filling their toolboxes with these strategies. And the best way we can do that is modeling, 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 right? If they see us and we are actually verbalizing also what we're doing at times, they're going to start picking up on those things. Not the first time, maybe not even, the 1000th time. But if we can create some of that consistency in our classrooms, across our building, and they are seeing these things modeled for them, it's going to start making a difference for them. Okay, I want to make sure that we have a couple of minutes here at the end that if you have questions or other things that you are using that you want to share out, I want to make sure we have space for that to happen. And you can do that by using the raise your hand feature. You can do that by adding it in the chat. I will really just open it up to anybody that has anything. Okay, so I see that one resource and I'm sorry, I know I just lost my video. I'm not sure why. One resource, and I actually don't know of this one, is Befriending Your Brain. That is a book that I have not read. So thank you. I love learning new things from you all. One book that and I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my video working again. One book that I really enjoy and that I will share about is called The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She is fantastic and does a lot of work around ACEs and helping to understand, there we go, I'm back, helping to understand what adverse childhood experiences can do, the impact that they can have on us kind of later in life. Let's see. So, a long list of strategies. So you have them. Yes, you're right. Yeah, that is that's a good point, because sort of everything that you find, and I'm talking to Shelley's comment, are just sort of these like small lists. And I even fall into that category, right? Of just having these short little lists. And it would be nice to have just like a big document, right? That we could have all of the strategies on, because there are so many. Gonna think about that. Oh, okay. The book Befriending Your Brain, awesome. So the author of that book is now also in the chat. Any other resources you find super helpful, strategies that you really like, questions you have? Trying to think of, I have so many, it's hard to even just kind of narrow it down right at the moment. But I will actually type in right now The Deepest Well so that you have it there. There you go. All right, anything else? You know, we've got just a couple of minutes. Slides, yes. And I will, okay, I will let you answer this one.
Yes, I will add that in the chat again, just in case. There we go.
Perfect. So there is the link for you to get the slides. And one other kind of lastly, all the different ways that you can get in contact with me. So if you are looking for a resource, or you have a question that you didn't want to share here, or you want to share something with me, I'm always looking to hear what people are using and what they love. Please don't hesitate to email me at any time. So please let me know if there's anything that you need that I can help you with. And then, of course, there's all the other 112, different places that you can find me on social media. I do actually share a lot about different de-escalation strategies, especially on my YouTube channel, videos of some of them in action. So you can check that out. That is all I have. I know we've got a couple of extra minutes. I just kind of very lastly, I want to say thank you to all of you who are here and joined in today, because you are the people who are, caring enough to want to make things better for our kids in schools. And I appreciate that you're taking the extra time because it takes extra, right, to do all of these extra things. So I just really appreciate you being here. I'm sure it's after school time for many of you. And also just thank you for doing what you're doing, because education is not an easy place to be, and I know that, and I appreciate everything that you all are doing. So please let me know how I can assist you, how I can provide resources to you if you're looking for something.
Great, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And a few closing remarks. There is a PGP request available. I will put that in the chat now, and it's also in the slides. And how it works is you will fill out an evaluation on today's session. And once you complete that evaluation, then the PGP certificate will be emailed to you. We are recording today, and we will add this video to the linked locations you see there. So we do have a Counselor Connect digital content library and a YouTube playlist. I encourage you to check those out, not only for today's content, but for others. And if you will go to the next one, Lisa.
Yes. There you go.
I also want to tell you about some upcoming events. Many of them are free. We actually have an event coming up this Friday. It's in person at the CIESC in Indianapolis. It's called Empowered and Transformed, and it's all about college and career readiness. Again, this is free. We will have many guest speakers, including Jason Callahan from the DOE and Michelle Ashcraft from the CHE. We also will have opportunities for networking. We have another free virtual session, college and career related, called Classroom to Career, and that is coming up soon. We have a winter learning bundle from Hatching Results. It's very inexpensive. There are 4 different sessions, and you can purchase those as a bundle for only $40, which is pretty unheard of when it comes to Hatching Results. So I encourage you to look for that. I believe they may have just posted that registration. If not, it's coming very soon. And we also have a winter book study that's coming up, and we will be reading together The Surprising Solution to Overthinking. Oh, I'm sorry, it starts with soundtracks. Soundtracks, The Surprising Solution to Overthinking. So we hope you'll join us for that. And there's a couple of other links on there, like the school counselor calendar. So I encourage you to check those out and subscribe to our monthly newsletter, where we have lots of helpful links and events for Indiana counselors. And if you'll go to the next one. We also have a new podcast series coming out from Counselor Connect with 2 of our local counselor leaders from Carmel and Center Grove. And it's all about student support talk. And this is great for anyone in the student service realm. So school counselors, social workers, anyone. And the next podcast will come out on December 8th, which is Friday. And finally, the last slide is our contact information. So again, I'm Samantha Vidal, and Amanda Colhan is the Counselor Connect coordinator. And please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And with that, we're all set for today. And again, we will send this information out to you with the slides and the recording, and we'll also post it online. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.